All right, we are live. We are locked in. You're locked on. We are live. This is Misaligned. Welcome to another episode of your favorite conversational show where we just talk about a bunch of things that you want to talk about, but you can't really, so you leave it to us to talk about, right? So today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different in a slightly different format. So usually the rest of the gang is going to be here, but this is one day where we're not. It's going to be me and Jab having a tete-a-tete, me and him just going toe-to-toe, having a slight conversation about something a bit different. Today we're going to be talking about feminism, everyone's favorite topic. Now, today's topic for discussion is around feminism. The general conversation being, has it been good or bad for society? So, fundamentally, feminism is one of the most influential social movements of the last century, probably even this one. I would even say the last 10 years has really fueled the feminism fire. Things have moved up a little bit in terms of the impact of feminism on day-to-day behaviors and general societal freedoms and behaviors. But has it really delivered freedom, or has it just resulted in a power shift to a new
Societal
elite control? Um,
behavior. Um,
oh, has it empowered women or has it divided society? Jab, what do you think?
So I think you need maybe a nuanced looking into this. I would say both. I mean, like everything else in life, you'd have pros and cons of feminism. I think on the whole, I think it's been a very positive change. I think that's how I would put it. What do you think?
I completely disagree. In this one, and this is good that we're starting off straight away into the misalignment. I think feminism has been one of the biggest problems that society has had lately. I think the idea of feminism has been to empower women to do things that they have no interest in doing, or to empower women to do things that are against their own interests. We can look at this in terms of a number of things. I'm not going to go as far as some of the more conservative, more modern day conservative ideas that have a much stronger view about the role of women in society. But I think empowering women to focus on empowerment, so to speak, is almost derailing or taking away from women's actual power. Women's power is not necessarily being a man, is my own view. I don't think women um becoming or acting like men or having the privileges or experiences or capabilities of men is empowering them. In my view, I think it actually weakens them. If we look at what feminism has done to society today, it has led to quite a lot of different negative impacts. Things like broken family structures. Feminism has led to broken families. In my view, that's one of the biggest things it's done. It started shifting and moving things to gender politics and a massive polarization between men and women around how we should live and how we interact with each other. And it's also led to quite a lot of confusion around things like gender theory, identity politics and relativism. It's been a bit of a challenge. I've not seen any real positive in terms of the benefits of feminism. The final thing, in my view, as well, where feminism has failed women, is that it's made them seek a different kind of lifestyle that isn't long term. Women generally, biologically, generally, not always, and this is important to point out, generally want to have a family. Men generally look for success and look for societal status. What feminism does is that it postpones it in most cases to far too long down the line. And then women are in the late 30s, early 40s, trying to figure out how to go back to more traditional ways. And feminism has blocked that. That's my view about that one.
Okay, so I think that's a very negative view. You've mentioned that it hasn't. You can think of one good thing it's done. How about the suffrage? Um, you know, voting rights, for instance, for women. The push about making sure that women get educated, because if you educate a woman, you do educate a family. Which
Do
I
you
don't.
though?
Hmm?
I'm not necessarily even sold on that either. I think so. I'm probably going to get a bit of a bite for this one, but the ability to vote, I think voting in itself comes with responsibilities and duties, and we
But,
don't
but that's
necessarily.
that's a good thing, though, isn't it? I mean, would you accept? I mean, so in terms of, first of all, definition, I think I agree with the definition you've given, which is, so I see feminism, first of all, because I think, let's see if we can align on this before we start going into nitty gritty. So my own understanding is that it's a, you can think of it as a socio-cultural and political movement, right? The aim of
Yep.
it is to bring equality to men and women. That's
Okay.
that's the purpose of it. I would agree with you that, well, in my view, I don't think that men and women are equal in the same way that you and I are not equal. You can't have two humans who are equal, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're centering feminism or anything at all on equality, I think that you're going to run into problems. However, we can talk about, let's say, equal rights in let's say payment. So you go to work, salaries, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Or in the number that you train, let's say, to be doctors, or equal opportunities, right? I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
people describe it, right? So it seems to me now that I think we kind of both broadly agree on what feminism is. So would you agree that being able to vote is a good thing, is a positive thing for women to be
Um,
able to vote?
not necessarily. The same, and this is quite is an interesting nuanced take because very often we tend to block these things in these monolithic perspectives around saying men men should vote or men used to be able to vote and now women as a block can vote, and it's not the case. Historically, not all men have been able to vote. That's never been the case. Men have only been able to vote fairly frequent in the Western world anyway, very closely to when women, quote unquote, women have been able to vote. Historically, it tended to be men who had access to assets or people or men of means in society, those who actually had a stake. I've got a slightly nuanced view about this one around we should not make voting become a monolithic thing where we just say everybody should vote,
Why not?
because very often people vote. Well, okay, is breaking. I can break this down to a few different pieces. Let me break this down at the highest level. I think that if we make everyone vote, we run the risk of undermining democracy itself, because people start voting against their own interests for a number of different reasons. For example, um, this is just going to be an example. I'm going to use a hypothetical example. Let's say my view is that people on benefits shouldn't vote. One of the reasons I could potentially say that is because more often than not, they will vote for things that are against capitalism and that are against things that allow them to get even more taxes that end up funding their benefits. They might focus on things like higher thresholds, like lower thresholds for them being able to get more benefits, which technically speaking would undermine their own ability to get the benefits that they want. Um, Another thing would be people being able to say, if we allowed children to vote, let's just open that out there to say 8, 9, 7, 6, 5 year olds should be able to vote. We'll start having nonsensical views because the political parties would start putting things like
I
kids
think
next
I
door.
think that's a different argument.
It's not
No,
really. It's the same wider demographic. The concept I'm going for is monolithic views around women, quote unquote, should vote. Men should vote. Coming to the specifics about women is, I don't think having, because what we've done the same thing. We've just said women should be able to vote. Well, why? What is the rationale why we've said women or men should be able to vote? Going back to the previous conversation that we had about democracy, I don't necessarily believe democracy is an optimal solution. I don't believe everybody should vote, and I think just opening this up to another group, a separate group of people as well, and allowing them to vote, I don't necessarily think that that is useful or helpful, because it doesn't take into consideration people's own proclivities. A lot of the current political agenda at the
okay,
moment, which is
no, but sorry.
go on.
Why have you got a problem with women voting? That's the thing I don't understand, because I'm not sure you've explained that. So, for
Mm,
children, I can answer that straight away. Kids are young; they don't understand what they're voting about. So, obviously, you can't say you're not going to ask a 6-year-old to vote on a subject they don't understand. So
yeah,
that's yeah. Um, the example with people on benefit. I mean, there are many reasons why people go on benefit. You and I, the difference between us and people who are on benefit, it's probably one or two paychecks,
yeah,
particularly in this capitalist country, right? So it means that someone as intelligent, as you know able and capable as you are, with all of those certificates, you can't tomorrow end up on the benefit. Now, would
yeah.
we say because you're on benefit, you shouldn't vote, for instance?
I would say we should have a structured system or approach to it. Say, for example, if someone has been unable to
No,
get into
sorry
the
to
system.
interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. I only say that my main question really is, what problem do you have with women voting? I that last example
Yeah,
I gave.
sure. Specifically, yeah. So fundamentally, my challenge is that we're given a monolithic block again. Another thing is like almost saying, well, we want to open up voting to black people or to white people or to it's the idea of a monolithic block. We're just saying women. What does that mean? First of all, which women are we allowing to vote? Which men are we? It's not necessarily opening up per se to women. It's about what criteria are we using to determine apart from the gender or their sex in this case. That's my issue. I don't think we
No,
should just
but,
open
but
it
I
up.
think everybody who can vote, who is of a sensible age, who
Mhm.
can vote, I think everybody should vote. I think as more people as you can participate, that's a good thing, isn't it?
No, I disagree because it doesn't. People's. I personally think, and I'm going a bit more stringent on this, that we should introduce standards around people's intellectual capabilities when they vote. We should introduce standards around their knowledge. We should probably even have tests when people come in to vote to say what policies are you voting for? What do you know about the candidates? What do you know about the parties? And do even multiple choice questions before people even finally get to who are you voting for that can disqualify them. I think we should introduce that is very, very important to introduce competence and knowledge based tests. So people are voting for something that they understand and they know, not just based on how they feel. And this is going into the female concept here, where I'm going to not really dive particularly too deep into it. But fundamentally, men and women are a bit different in terms of how we are, biologically. And this is a general statement. It's not necessarily focused on every single specific individual, but men have been shown to be a little bit more logical than women, and women have been shown to be a little bit more emotional or empathetic than men. Now, what that means is that more often than not, women are more likely to vote for communitarian and on a few more left-wing group identity views around how things should be, which has led to very often, in my view, what the world is today, where we're accepting a bunch of things that I consider to be nonsensical views and behaviors, and we're moving them into the mainstream, which goes against people's interests.
Hmm. I'm not sure. First, okay, so I'm not sure I agree. No, I'm not sure I understand you, but so okay, so if in an ideal world, your ideal world, who would you allow to vote? Who would vote and why?
I think in my ideal world, I would allow only people. Well, fundamental. I mean, I'll push. Well, there's two views. There's the extreme view, which you can use for more, to get a bit more of a potentially aroused from people. But the more moderate view that I would use is that it would be any individual who has a stake of society, who is of sound mind, who has a competence level that has been objectively assessed to be at or above the average, and they have knowledge about the policies for which they are voting. Having a stake would involve whether they have a job. They have had a job in the past 6 months, no more than no more than 6 months that they've been unemployed. Um, um, and then yeah, I think for me that would be it. And that does not discriminate between any genders. It's not necessarily about gender. It's about whether they have a stake, whether they know what it is that they're voting for, and whether they are of sound mind to be able to make that vote.
Okay, so in that definition, then you don't have anything against women voting, then?
Not necessarily. The only issue I have against it is the monolithic idea of saying women as a group votes. Like, no, we're just expanding democracy again into even more
It-
nonsense than what's
yeah,
currently
no,
going.
but before that, but there's a history before that. So the history before that is that we are going to use the West because it's not the same in other parts of the world, right? So we're going to
Mhm.
use the West in this instance, and until maybe late 20th 1900s and something, women couldn't vote. So it was all men, and they were rich white men basically who owned properties. Those
Mhm.
were the only people who could vote pretty much throughout the entire history, Western history.
Yep.
And and only they could vote and be voted for. So blacks, Hispanics, you name it, everybody else just couldn't vote. And
Blacks who
so
didn't have assets or monetary power. Yes, agreed.
yes. And so this is why I was saying that the US or the West has never really been a democracy, because that is not participatory. You can't say that only 3% of people can vote and be voted for, because if that's what it is, then that's not the voice of the people, of the majority, is not being heard. You can't call that democracy. Yeah.
I mean, is
So
America a democracy then? Because America
what?
follows that the collegiate.
No. In my definition, it's not. It's never been.
Mm,
It's never been. In my understanding, it's always been a plutocracy. So it's always been ruled in the interest of corporations. The country itself was formed as a corporation, in the
yep.
same way Nigeria and India and so many of these countries were formed as they were companies before they moved into nation states. So it's all about power and the interest of power. That's what it's been.
Mhm.
So, and when they then said we are going to allow people to vote, it does not mean that people always had democracy, because again, this is another criticism, because yes, you can vote, but they've done it in such a way that power still stays with the elites. They've hijacked the thing that we call elections. So such that you've got two parties, to even be on the voting on the ballot, you need to have bribed. Well, I mean, I know they don't call it bribe. They call it
Lobbying, isn't it? Really?
I don't think it's exactly, but we know that it's bribe, right? So you need to have bribed these people, the companies and all that. They have to be happy that you're going there to defend their interests before you can even make it to the ballot box. And it's a two-party system, so it's one or the other. Anybody else who doesn't fit into either of these two, it's like two sides of a bird, or two sides of a coin, or you can think of an eagle with two flapping wings. Whether it's the right wing or the left wing, it's still the eagle, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's the system. That's the
like
system in place. So the whole idea of democracy. That's what I said last week. That democracy is an ideal, to the extent that you define it as government of the people, for the people, by the people. I am confident in stating that neither America or the UK or Germany or any of these countries has ever been a democracy. They haven't. Yes, they might say they have been, but it doesn't make them one just because someone professes to be you know to be a thing.
yeah.
Doesn't make it so. Right. So to go back to that point, that's where so feminism, I would say, amongst other civil rights movement and all of those things, but the feminists were at the forefront of pushing for women able to vote, for girls to go to school. And I was saying earlier that if you educate a girl, or a girl child, they are going to, it's like a capital. It's a social capital, social mobility. Studies have shown that her children are going to be, hopefully do better than her, in terms of being educated, having the ability to make sure they also have education and good health, and so the outcome is generally better. I don't think that is
Is,
actually.
is it better though? And I think this allows us to jump into the second part because of as usual for everyone, we have three sections when we have these conversations. I think this jumps quite nicely into the second piece here of is feminism actually compatible with traditional cultural or religious frameworks? I think this is the key thing, because what the point you've raised now about how feminism leads to empowerment and how it leads to a better generation because there's going to be better better educated children, etc. I completely disagree. I think what feminism has or can or will and does lead to is to broken homes. I think a more recent viewpoint I've run across has been the idea that Why do we allow our smartest, our brightest, our best woman to go into the workforce and sit in a cubicle, to go and sit down there and provide value to some random guy in his suit who's making millions, rather than focusing on raising her family and her kids? If our best and brightest women should do what they should have done traditionally, culturally, and from a religious viewpoint, if they focus on delivering that to the family, won't it be more impactful? If we had our mothers, the best mothers, actually focusing on raising kids the way we had this in our time, wouldn't that lead to a better society, rather than a society where they go to the office 5 days a week, they're struggling, doing 60, 70 hours a week of working and trying to deliver value, rather than providing the maternal value that they should be providing at home?
Yeah. Okay. So that I think is a legitimate criticism of the feminist movement. I would accept that, right? And I'm going to go a bit further, which is that again, if you study the history of feminism, like it always happens. So you always have to think first of all, who pays the piper, right? Whose interest is being served? Where where just follow the money, everything's going to make sense. Now, as always happens, capitalism, I think, has co-opted, used feminism. So I wouldn't say that feminism is a bad movement. I think, I think overall, like I said to you, I think it's a very good movement. I think that it achieved quite a lot, but anything can be abused, right? So, and what's happened is, okay, women said we want equality, we want work, we want job, we want human rights, we want all of these things, all good aspirations. But what's then happened is capitalism or employers have now exactly what you said, which is then allowed women to come and sit in this cubicle, like you described it, to work, moved away from the family. Okay, take a typical example. You and I, we're both married. We've got little ones, right? So
Mhm.
you've got to work. You know, my wife works, and we don't have family close by. So we've got two choices. Either one of us does not work, which then means that financial pressure is significant, or
Mhm.
we both work, but then somebody then has to look after the kids when we're both at work. And who's that going to be? It's going to be the nursery.
Stranger, a random person
A
somewhere.
random person, exactly. A totally random person who just does that as a job. They are not, I'm really sorry to say, but they haven't got the emotional attachment that myself and my wife, for instance, might have. And
Agree.
and and therefore they're not even, if a child falls, they're not even allowed to give a child a cuddle, you know,
Yeah.
and all of these things.
Which is again due to feminism, though.
Yes, but so like, I think my own explanation is that that would be a genuine criticism, which is that it's now become co-opted into. So okay, you want to work, that's fine, go and work. You can get education, get all of these things. But then the situation then is now we don't even have a choice. Men and women now no longer even have a choice. Whether you like it or not, both men and women now have to work because
I disagree with that, right? I think I fundamentally disagree with that
no,
premise.
no, no, no. Let me explain this. What I'm meaning is that we've got to the point now where if you went back, let's say here in the UK, let's use the UK for instance, 7 or 8 years ago, right? Or even 60 years ago or 50 years ago, a guy who is a truck driver, right, might have 4 or 5 kids at home. And on his little salary, his wife stays at home and she looks after the family. He can look after them comfortably, right?
I don't know
Yeah.
about comfortably, but you can look after them. Yes.
Well, he can look after them, like his family will feed and they would go to school.
Hmm.
And but right now, what you're finding is that men and women have no other choice, have very little choice than to both work. I'm talking about like the average family. I don't mean people who are in the upper class. I'm just talking about just normal average families. Because take for instance the price of houses in the UK
Hmm.
back in those times I was talking about. The average salary, the average house was probably maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 times the average salary, right?
Versus 8 times
Now,
now.
Now is about like what, 10, 15, or even maybe 20 times or so. Therefore, when you take on that mortgage, you have made yourself a debt slave practically for the rest of your life. So you and your wife have no choice than to work.
Again, I think I disagree, and the reason why I disagree is fundamentally because I think what's happened is we are now in an age of consumerism. And this ties back to feminism a little bit, but I'll rub this back in a second. We're moved, and I think this ties into the topic that the subtopic that we're talking about. But we're in an age of consumerism now, where we consume way more than we used to consume 20, 30 years ago. So if we even think back, because we're both old enough to definitely look back at the last 20 years or 30 years, and then understand how people used to live. A lot of the things that exist now did not exist then. Things like Netflix, Spotify, even car payments, the types of cars that were there, not that many options around that. The areas that people used to live were not necessarily the same kind of areas that people live in now. It's just a different world. The mobile phone craze of changing your phone every year is what it's turning into at this point, right? Versus then, I'd say even 10, 15 years ago, you change your phone once every 5 years. Now it's every single year. It's expected. Yeah. The amount of subscription-based services that are being offered, whether it's YouTube Premium or whatever it is, it's just through the roof. We're at a point now where we don't live simple lives because we've decided and we've chosen not to, which eats into the income that people have. I think that's the fundamental one. The second thing is that if you compare the cost of living of living in a central location, like say London, for example, yes, of course, the standard of living is going to be significantly higher, versus when you're living way outside. But people can choose to go and live way outside. I have one of my friends who decided to go stay in a place somewhere outside Bradford, and they're paying about £500 a month for rent. That's not what a lot of people are paying for rent or for a mortgage. In some cases, there's quite a few people some other people I know that are buying houses that are worth £800,000. You know what I mean? Do you have to live in an £800,000 house? No. If you live in an £800,000 house, you're both going to work, period. You know what I mean? So there's the choices and trade-offs, which I believe feminism has led to, where the additional expectation that women are now being that's now being put on women, that women should be able to provide value in the home. Men should not be the breadwinners and the providers. Men can take a back seat and let women come and support, and be a 50-50. I don't believe in 50-50 relationships. I say this all the time. I do not think that a man and woman should split bills. I don't think so. Whatever a woman brings should be an extra. 20% is what a woman should be bringing. Maybe 30% at the max. At over 30%, you're giving her more strain than she would actually even like, even with the feminist movement in place. Look at modern dating. When we'll jump, I think we'll talk about relationships with men and women as the final point or the final section of this conversation. But fundamentally, when you see a man and woman go to date, or they go on a first date, the man is still expected to pay. Men are still expected to pay. It's just what it is. If you take a woman out and say, let's go have a drink, you're going to pay. Why? Because even though feminism is pushing for equality of outcomes, and this is an important thing, feminism has pushed for equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. It said men and women should have the same outcomes and should have the same lives that they live, which is completely flawed. Equality of outcomes is a completely wrong thing. It doesn't work. So it's led to issues where women are in this confused state in the modern day where they're not sure. It's Schrodinger's feminists. Are they empowered or are they victims? They're both, depending on the circumstances that exist. And they're confused. We're confused. Everybody's confused. And that comes back to the question about compatibility. This isn't compatible with traditional frameworks. Men and women traditionally have different roles. Men seek to be the providers. We want to be the protectors. It's who and how we are. Women also seek to be taken care of and provide nurture. They can't do that because they're confused. Well, should I go work? Should I be a strong, independent woman, or should I be the woman who is more subtle, more submissive, the softer side of the relationship? They don't know. They're confused. Culturally, it's the same thing as well. Just the point that I made right now about paying for dates. Men are supposed to, but women are now pushing for 50-50, but they don't want to pay 50-50. They don't like it. It doesn't work for them in most cases. You know what I mean? From a religious perspective, men are supposed to be the head of the household, but they can't be because now the current view is that men should behave in a different way and women should be equal because feminism, which doesn't work.
Okay, so I think my feeling is that, like, with a lot of the conversations we've had in the past, I feel as though you are judging a concept by
Its execution. Yes.
exactly, or
Mhm.
by the flawed humans who are executing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to use an analogy, it's like trying to judge Christianity or let's say Islam by its adherents, right? Because they don't always. So you need to go back and think about what is feminism. What does it seek to achieve? I don't think that what it seeks to achieve is a bad thing. But I mean, I agree with you that things are going to run into trouble. So when you go on like the Nigerian, so because all we do in Nigeria is we copy and paste without thinking, is this thing
Yeah.
does this thing fit our reality, right? So I see a lot of what one might call maybe toxic femininity,
Femininity.
feminism, which is this idea that everything about a man is just bad,
Bad.
and all they do is like just attack men. No man is good. No man, you say the slightest harmless point, and it's totally taken out of context, and the man is absolutely skinned. To me, I think that is I think it's an abuse of what feminism stands for. That's how I see it.
What is feminism? Maybe I mean maybe we might have skipped the, jumped the gun on this one. But
No, I did explain it. So I think it's a socio-cultural and political movement, right? The purpose of which is to bring about equality of the sexes. Yeah, but like I explained, I don't think that men and women can be equal. They are not equal. Like I explained, you can't find two humans that are equals.
so if you're saying that, then how can if you're saying that equality is not a thing, isn't that ideology already flawed already? So even regardless of the execution, then if the ideology itself is flawed, how can the
Yeah.
execution be anything else but flawed as well?
Well, not necessarily, because again, so like I said, you need to look at how feminism itself has evolved. Because when it started, so stuff like women cannot vote, women couldn't go to school,
Mm.
and now we've got female doctors, we've got engineers. Men and women can excel at the same job because obviously of their biology. For instance, women have to take time to have children and all of those things. They may not always provide that sort of workforce that men can provide 24/7, 365 days a year, right?
They don't have
So
to though, do they? According to feminism, women don't have to have kids. Because that's the idea of feminism. That they're not equal. So a woman is as equal to a man in terms of determining whether or not they want to have a family.
yeah, but I mean, I think that is a matter of personal choice. I think if somebody doesn't want to have children, then that's fine. If they
Mhm.
want to have children, then maybe create the opportunity for them to go and have their family and come back and excel. That's how I see it.
Mhm.
I don't think that is a problem. So it started out that way, and then obviously then we started to talk about workplace equality, and then it transitioned to. I think I hear what you're saying about LGBTQ and all of that, and I think more lately, maybe in the 200s type of thing, it's I think what people sometimes refer to as like the third wave of uh, feminism. That's where you start to talk about intersectionality, you
Mm.
know, gender,
Mhm.
sex, race, you know,
Mhm.
feminism, that sort of thing. I think that's where maybe it started to get a bit more, you know, all the
Confused.
identity politics and
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's probably where you're talking about. I think those are the issues that you're probably trying to highlight earlier. But to my mind, and I'm not an expert on this subject by any means, but to my mind, I think that what's happened is, as with anything else, these things evolve and they get co-opted by, in this instance, capitalism, and it gets derailed, and then you start to have this really toxic, you know, feminism which just seeks to just attack
Men.
attack
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
anti-man. It's what it's turned into. It's turned into a movement, in my view, that aims to dismantle the quote-unquote patriarchy, because I don't necessarily believe there's a patriarchy based on gender or sex. I believe there's a patriarchy based on competence. But it seems to be attacking men to destroy what it is. And it's just a movement that isn't predicated on anything that leads to success in any of the paradigms that exist. Whether we're looking at this from a perspective of family, which we probably should jump into that now and just finalize that, whether it's dealing with family, whether it's dealing with women's happiness and their own progress and success, the equality of opportunity of outcome that they're aiming for, even though that seems to be what they're aiming for. They're talking about opportunity of equality of opportunity, but really aiming for equality of outcome. I want 50% of CEOs to be female, but I don't want 50% of plumbers to be CEOs as well. I want 50% of doctors to be, 50% of the highest paying easy jobs, with quote unquote easy jobs, that a white collar should be women, but that equality should not taper down to other things. It doesn't work in reality. It doesn't work. Things around bodily autonomy. So if you look at the Roe v. Wade, technically speaking, that was aiming for equality. I'm not a fan of. I mean, I could say this up there. I wasn't a fan of the right wingers, especially in America. I think they're a bit interesting, to say the least, in America. But the Roe v. Wade was an aim at was a stab at equality, to say actually men have no rights over abortions. We're going to take this away from the federal level and move this to the states and let the states decide whether women should have rights that supersede men's rights. And then people are up in arms about that. And I'm saying, well, actually, no, this is equality. Technically speaking, this is what feminism is looking for. Feminism is not equal, it should not be equality at the expense of men, but should be equality, period, across both sides and both sexes. But just to jump into the last section as well, maybe we should jump into this piece, unless you've got something else you want to talk about in that other area around compatibility with traditional cultural and religious frameworks. I think it's important for us to talk about the impact of feminism on men and women's relationships.
So yeah, no, I think when you say cultural compatibility, the thing is that culture didn't drop from heaven, right?
Mhm.
Culture, traditions, religions, they didn't drop from heaven. They are human constructs. So in some sense, they're not these things that are like infallible and
Immutable.
so does that make sense?
Great.
So and also it also depends on what culture you're talking about, because culture is not uniform. You can talk about British culture, you can talk about even within Britain, you can maybe even talk about Scottish culture and Welsh culture. So it isn't one thing. But let me give you this is totally anecdotal, right?
Mhm.
So when my grandparents were farmers,
Mhm.
and I did spend a little bit of time with them when I was quite little. But one of the things I remember was they had clear division of labor, which is that the men went out, my uncles and or my grandfather and his brothers, and they all went out and they did most of the farming.
Mhm.
They did the most heavy lifting. The women had smaller farms, if I can, or homesteads, more like they didn't go far. They because so they had to cook. They did the house chores and the cleaning and the looking after the kids, and they had farms that were not at all far, and they tended to farm the things like the easier things like legumes and um, um, the vegetables, things that you're going to use to.
Gatherer. Women are more the gatherers rather than the hunters, or rather
Yes,
than
yes,
even
yes. I
the men
suppose
who
maybe
hunt.
yes. So that's probably maybe a good way to do it. So they did those sort of minor jobs. Now, when my grandfather came back home, this was usually very very late, and food was by this time, prepared or nearly prepared, and then he ate, and we all sat down under the moonlight and told stories. The kids
Tales
kind
by
of like
moonlight.
we're half as tales by moonlight exactly, and by whatever time that was, it used to be like late. I don't know whether that is 9 or 10 p.m. or whatever it is. We've all
Mhm.
like slept outside, and then they wake us all up, and then we go in and sleep. And crack of dawn, before the first cocks, crowed, they're off again. Grandfather died. So the whole thing just keeps repeating, right?
Yeah.
So then the next generation, which were my parents, they then had white collar job and white and blue collar job. So they went to town, and people became nurses, and joined the military, police officers, and you know what I mean, the usual sort
Yeah.
of, yeah. So, but
Modern day
modern
work.
day, exactly, yes. But by this time, the economy had been structured.
Mm.
We may need a different day to discuss this, but we went from agrarian self-sufficiency to becoming what I call wage laborers.
Yeah.
Basically, the system by this time, it was all about, right, we're going to give you this piece of paper, and you give us X amount of your time on a daily
Mhm.
basis, right? So my father, for instance, then would go to work, and come back. Maybe I don't know, he might maybe come back at 4 p.m., 5 p.m., depends on the day. Sometimes he will do night shifts and all of those things, but he
Mhm.
had more time than my granddad did. So,
Yeah.
but I feel as though he tried to have the best of both worlds, in the sense that his free time, he maintained that, well, when I was growing up, we had these very defined roles, and I'm going to continue with these defined roles.
Mhm.
Whereas, in my view, even as a kid at that time, I was thinking, well, actually, you've got this more free time. Maybe you can actually help out with things like, washing the dishes, or in my child, in the eyes of a child, I was thinking, well, we can actually maybe do more. But I think he maintained that it had to be this strictly gendered role, which I
Mhm.
think is kind of problematic. So he has evolved, the society has evolved, but he hasn't. He's still wanting to live like his grandfather, and so
Mhm.
like his dad. And when I served in Bayelsa State, I saw pretty much the same thing, which
Mhm.
was that these men who were now in this new economy, they didn't go to the farms. These guys just sat down at home and just drank from morning till evening. The women went out into the forest to gather all the food and all of those things, and they came back, and they basically just did so much. And I was thinking, what is wrong with these guys? Because like that was like totally new. That was a whole another level. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? So I feel as though some of the criticisms that feminism or Nigerian women talk about, because I know we're saying that they curse men. I can kind of see why, because the thing is that the society has evolved. This is not pre-colonial Africa, right?
Mhm.
Times have changed, but it looks as though our men still want the best of both worlds, which is that they work, they've got time, and they come back home, and all they want to do, even though there's a lot of job to do, they just want to put their feet up, and just like relax, and just have the woman run around the kids, and bring my food and all of that. Does that make sense? So
I think that's correct. I think that's the traditional value that feminism is incompatible with, for good reason. I think men who go and do the minimum, like say your grandfather went out, did extra to get less, and then in our father's generation, they went out and got more in less time, should go out and do even more. That's my view. If you're not providing excess and you have capacity to provide excess, as a man, it's your duty to go and provide more. If you're not doing that, you're failing. If you come back home and you're not providing a family where your family does not want, your family does not want for anything major. um if you're not providing that situation, then you have no right to sit down and expect a woman to do anything at home for you. You come back home and you go and you wash the dishes. However, if you are providing that excess, that
give me
is
2 seconds, just speak in the light.
no worries. For those, anyway, just carry on with the point for anyone who's watching.
Yeah,
I
I'm back.
don't think. Oh, you're
I'm
back.
back.
Okay, it's great stuff. Yeah, I don't think a man, I don't think a man should come back home after doing and be thinking about washing the dishes. I just don't think so. If you're doing that, then you're already failing in your primary responsibility somewhere, which is why
Why
you're
is that? But why is that?
because a man, in my view, a man should be able to provide it sufficiently enough.
No,
That's
no, but it's not that what you're providing is insufficient, right? What I'm
it,
saying
it
is
is
that
for doing that because that should not be a man's role. That's my I
no.
believe in more traditional roles.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay, put it this way. Put it this way. Put it this
Mm,
way. If your job, let's say you've got a military background, your dad goes to work and he comes back and he's done his job for that day.
mhm,
And let's say he finishes at 3 a.m. that 3 p.m. that day.
mhm.
What you saying? He needs to go out and do what again?
No, it's not. If what he's doing at the end of the month, anyway, or the end of the year, or whatever, is sufficient to provide for the family, you can sit down and
Yeah.
watch TV and do whatever. If
Right.
if the if the
So,
wife
so,
at home,
but that's my point then. So
mhm,
so he comes back because previously a generation or two back, he would
mhm,
probably still be like slugging it out, right, on the farm.
yes,
And
mhm,
coming back home, maybe, I don't know, 7 p.m. or something ridiculous like that, absolutely exhausted. And
yep,
then at the crack of dawn, he's got to do this all over again, right?
mhm,
But now he's finishing at 3 p.m. So he's
yep.
got the rest of this day. Is it your argument that he should not be involved in childcare and he's just let
Absolutely
the
not.
wife?
Nope. He might be able to spend a bit of time, with the kids to provide fatherly care and providing that more fatherly view of things. But I will never expect I can't imagine my father. So to give you that context, my mom never needed to work. She never needed to work, but she did work a little bit here and there until she retired. She retired 30 years ago. I think either through she worked for this bank called Savannah Bank, and they went through some sort of restructuring or something, and the bank ceased to exist. And then my mom never worked a day after that. There is no expectation that my father will come back home and wash any dishes. To me, I find that to be utterly insane. There is just that blurring of lines to me is utterly insane from a traditional and cultural perspective. There is no reason why a man should come. The only reason a man should come back home and wash the dishes is if he's not providing what he should be providing from a financial, monetary, and protectoral perspective.
No,
That's it.
no, no. I think you are taking this in a right. Okay.
If a woman, so my
let's,
view,
let's, no, let,
it's,
let's let's put it
it's
this way.
almost
Let's
like,
put
oh,
it this
sorry,
way.
let me just expand on this one. It's almost for me like a woman saying, I'm going to go and start working now because the man is not working enough to provide for the family. That's how I see it. It's just we're flipping it on other sides, to the other edge. From again, we're talking about traditional or cultural compatibility. It's almost like saying that woman is sat at home, she's raising all the kids, and she's saying, when the man comes back home from work, there's still money left to be done, so she has to go and work as well, or go and do a side job to generate family for the money for the family. Then the man has failed. If the man has to come back home from work and take care of the house, then the woman has failed. But we've got to this idea now that this accountability is lost on us
Okay. No, no.
around.
So my argument is this, right? My argument is the job that the woman is doing. Let's assume that she was a housewife.
Yes.
Okay. So you've done some work and you've come back home at 3. You've got
Mhm.
young kids. My point is that her job does not end at 3, does it? Because you've still got the kids running around wanting
Right. Yep.
attention and all of those kind of things, right? People
Yep.
getting in all kinds of trouble, just what kids do.
Yep.
Then they've got to eat,
Mhm.
clothes to wash, bits and bobs and stuff.
Yep.
Is it your argument that the man should just fold his hand and just
I'm
do
not
his
saying
own
you
thing?
should fold his hand and do nothing. That a man is like, oh, something falls in front of me, like, no, not touching this. It's a woman's job. I have no interest whatsoever in touching anything around the house. No, it's more about that
Right. Okay. So,
fundamentally
so we
the
agree then.
home. Yeah, I
We
think
agree then.
no,
We
kind of,
agree then.
with the
No.
nuance, with
So
the key nuance here.
okay. No, but where I'm coming from, the reason I went through the length of
Mm,
the trouble of explaining this thing is I was trying to explain why I think some Nigerian women, particularly African women, talk about toxic masculinity or they talk about the problems with patriarchy because they feel as though it's patriarchy or our culture that has imposed
mm,
this thing on them. But to my mind, this is actually quite recent. It's a new thing, and that's happened since. Prior to that, yes, we had defined gender roles, and it had to be. So if you were
yeah.
to go back, let's say, extreme example, but you go back to a few 100,000 years or so when society was being organized. Okay,
Yeah.
earlier I said to you that men and women are different because we're not equal, right? We're
Yeah.
stronger, we've got testosterone and all of those things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you had to, let's say, run and kill a lion, for instance, again, extreme examples,
Mm-hmm.
men might be more suited to doing that than women,
Yep.
right? So you had to have division of labor because back in them days, it wasn't a time when we had technology as we know it today. So it was brute force. So you needed men to do that. And so
Mhm.
women also, because of their biology, they had to have the kids. Well, they stayed more and nurtured the kids and looked after the kids and, made sure they were protected at home. So that carried on. And for us in Africa, pre-colonial Africa, that's kind of basically how the system was structured, right?
Mhm.
For very good reasons. But once the economy became restructured and we moved from agrarian economy to wage labor, actually
Mhm.
wage slavery, if you ask me,
Mhm.
I feel as though men continued or pretended that nothing has changed and they still wanted to just carry on in the roles that they were. And I think that explains some of the anger that women have. That's where I was coming from.
Fair enough. I mean, I can agree with key parts of that. I can agree that yes, the world has changed, and I agree that women have some women in the modern world have a gripe with that. The only part I would slightly disagree with is about the fact that the requirements to be able to be successful in the modern world, because I think that's an implication of what you're saying. The requirements to be successful, in the modern world are now becoming asexual, and I disagree with that. I think it's still masculine traits that are still required to be successful in today's world. You have to be highly disagreeable, you have to be very aggressive, you have to be highly conscientious, you have to be unemotional and really objective about the way you assert your dominance in the world. And that, I think this leads quite nicely, although because I'm curious, I'm just conscious of time and I want to just stick to that 10-minute mark over because we're a little bit late on this session. My fault, time zone. Sorry everyone who's watching. But this ties into the next piece around this, and then the implications of feminism on men's relationship with women, and saying, well, has it made it more transactional and unstable? What are the implications? Now we're talking about this already. What are the implications of feminism on actual relationships between men and women? Has it improved them? Has it made them worse? Based on that, what do you think, Jab?
So I'm not sure it's done. I'm not sure that it's done it one way or the other.
Mm,
I think that hmm, it's a good point. I mean, I haven't thought about this. In my view, I think it really maybe just boils down to the couple, the people who are involved in that relationship. I think that if they have an understanding that it's a unit, they have a family together, they've got children together, and they're going to try and work together to make a success of it. I think that is fine. However, obviously, two cannot work unless they agree.
mhm,
I think you would have problem if a guy, in the examples I gave. So if somebody, let's say, had the attitude of certain jobs are only for men, and I'm not going to do it, and therefore the woman is killing herself. She's got four children running around the house. Everybody is, screaming. She's trying to sort them out. She's got to cook. She's got to do, ABC, and the guy is just chilling and just watching TV. I think
mhm,
that is going to be problematic for that relationship. Yeah.
mhm. I mean, I've got a few notes on this one because this is something I've been looking at for quite a while, and I've been really interested in terms of
Okay.
the dynamic between men and women, and what feminism has done. I think feminism has been fundamentally detrimental to the relationship between men and women. I think feminism has led to a breakdown of longevity in family backgrounds, and I'll give you a couple reasons why. The first reason is that it's redefined gender roles around what men should be and what women should be in a relationship. To the previous section that we talked about, the implications of feminism from a traditional cultural perspective, it's redefined this, which has led to a situation where we're now at loggerheads. Traditional roles are now seen as oppressive. If you act like a man, you're an oppressor. You are a patriarch. You're a misogynist. If you do anything that's slightly masculine, it now makes you become bad, which has led to disrespect for men and a sense of looking
What
down
do you
on
mean by
women.
that? What do you mean by that?
Which
What do
part?
you mean?
Which
Break it
part?
down.
Yeah. So
This
fundamentally,
tradition.
yeah, because so fundamentally it's like this. If a man says what I've just said, that I don't think a woman's place is in the workforce. I think a woman's place, if you have a family, have kids, etc. Even if you don't even have kids, fundamentally most women, and I'll put this out there as a big number and say 90% of women, even men, I'll say even maybe not 90% of men, because men are a bit different. Why are they a bit different? Excuse me. Well, why are they a bit differently? 90% of women don't want to work. If you give them the option and say don't work, they're not going to work. Men, we kind of have this thing that we feel like we have to have this status. We have to have that drive. We have to make that impact, for our names or our lives to mean something. We want to work. We want to deliver value.
But that's probably all. I don't think it's anything innate or genetic. It will just.
I think it's
probably just
genetic. I think it's innate.
social.
I think it's innate.
Social.
Nope. Disagree. Nope.
No,
Absolutely not.
I think.
Absolutely
Okay.
not. Nope.
Well, let me land.
Mm-hmm.
Let me land. So I think that is probably social conditioning.
It can be. In your premise, before you even land this plane, I'm going to hijack that plane before you even land anywhere. Because the idea that it could be it could be socialized, it is predicated on the idea that socialization has occurred globally, where a world of almost 8 billion people, probably even more, it's about the same now, about 8 billion now, of multiple different backgrounds with different levels of developmental views, different social cultural values, and different religiosities across all of these cultures, but we all behave the same way. I mean, we've all been. It's like if a lizard in India is behaving the same way as a lizard in England, is behaving the same way as a lizard in Nigeria, then it's because it's a lizard. But somehow we've got this idea, and this is the thing. That's the issue I've got. One second, this is the issue I've also got with the current view of socialism, or feminism, that says that men have behaved a certain way because women have behaved a certain way because they've been conditioned to behave a certain way. It's like, no, that's just what we are. Men naturally are inclined to be protectors and providers. It is in us. It's innate, regardless of what culture you're looking at, regardless of the culture, regardless of the timeline that you're talking about throughout the entirety of history. Men have always been the same. We have always been the same with women. Women have always been the same. They've always been the ones to provide nurturing. They've always been the ones to provide love and care. Always been the one to be able to provide stability for the family and for the home. And the idea that somehow they've been socialized into this submissive, into this little shoved in the backroom corner thing, and men are these socializing into becoming aggressive and dominant, it's completely, in my view, nonsensical and has no correlation with actual reality. That's my view on that specific topic. I haven't finished on the other points, but we can go through this and then I'll go to the other points that I had around this specific thing around the relationship with men and women.
So I don't know when it's a good time to jump in, whether I wait for you to make all your points but I'm going to just, because I think you might have misunderstood my previous comment, right? So let me bring it up again. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that you have to look at the economic imperatives, because you can't really discuss anything in life without looking at the economics, because it imposes conditions upon you that you have to respond to, right? So the reality at the moment is that most households in the West, two people have to work. That is the reality. Right. And we have like a lot of say that again.
I mean, I'll just give you very quick on this one that I disagree on one point, just because.
No. One second, Cross. What I'm saying to you is not. I'm not. Again, this is verifiable. That is a situation. You would know that a lot of Black women, single mothers, for instance, have to tie down like 2 or 3 jobs. They're working back to back to be able to put food on their table. People are having to use food banks and all of those kind of things. Life is hard. We're now at a situation where, okay, previously, if you went, again, like I said, 60, 70, 80 years ago, right, a man with just an average job could easily provide for the family, with the woman being just at home looking after their kids. And you're absolutely right about the issues about consumerism. Back in them days, again, you only bought what you needed. You didn't use credit card. It wasn't that sort of society. These days I see people like they buy a sofa every 2 years or something, and new kitchen, everything is on credit, cars and phones, and you have to change your phone every so often. So I agree with you, those issues were not there, but that is just one side. The second side, an example that I gave to you, for instance, again, is house, right? So the average salary back then and an average house, the ratio was maybe something like 1 to 3, right?
Mhm.
At the moment, we're looking at a ratio about 1 to 15 or 1 to 20, which means if the average salary is 20K and a house is 200 or 250K, you are, if you choose to go that way, you've become a debt slave
Yeah, but
pretty
why
much for
salary
another
gone up?
25 years or so.
You can't avoid the fact that the reason why salary has gone up is because we've introduced double. So just for and anyone's watching knowledge or a bit of my background. I'm an economist, right? And one of the first things we talk about in economics is supply and demand. If you double the supply of labor, which is what we've effectively done, because women are effectively 51% of the population. If you double the supply of labor, you're going to have the wages. So what's happened is we've now introduced women into the workforce, and we're now paying each of them, rather than paying one man double what they're earning now, we're now paying half to each. Which is like, well, why have we done that? Because what that's going to lead to is double cost of everything. Because we've now basically changed the structure around how monetary value has worked. If we'd left it where it was, and I'm not saying that that's optimal. I'm not saying it's
So,
optimal.
so I'm not sure that that is exactly what happened. I think you
Exactly
have to again go back
studies that look
to
at
the
that. That's
neo.
exactly what's happened. It's exactly what's
Okay,
happened.
so
The introduction of women into the
right.
workforce has reduced the value of labor. Period. It's not even contestable.
Okay, okay. I'm not. I can look into that, but I've got a different explanation, which is that it's the neoliberal, economics where everything over the last 40, 50 years in most of the world, but also coming here,
Mhm.
is why life is so hard. So, but the trouble is that people have to live in a house. If you
Yeah.
go from a ratio of 1 to 3 to 1 to 20, well, salaries haven't kept up at pace with that. That's why it's a ratio of 1 to 20. Therefore, to be able to afford a house and do on top of all the consumerism that you've rightly pointed out, it
Mhm.
means then that more people have to work. And so, in a
If less
normal
women
average
work,
house,
if all the women
what you
if all the women right now said we're not working anymore, we give up, we're not working. Any woman in a relationship just said, even if they're not relationships, all the women, let's just do this hypothetical scenario. All the women in the UK just wake up and say, we're not working. What's going to happen?
Mhm.
Salaries are going to go up because they're going to like, well, we've lost half our labor. We need to get more people in. What's going to happen to wages is what always happens with demand and supply. If the supply drops, demand
Yes,
is going
okay,
to
but
price is going to go up.
even if it did,
Mhm,
but I'll put it to you. Even if that situation were to happen,
mhm,
okay, maybe the wage will double, right? It's
mhm.
still not going to affect the price of a house because
No, but it would impact the income. So you no longer need two people to work because those two people's
yes,
income now becomes so. Wait, 1 sec. Because what you're saying is now housing prices is, I don't know, let's say 15 times. I'm not sure the differential is as high as 15 versus 3. I think it's somewhere 4 versus 8, but it doesn't matter.
it's somewhere around there.
It doesn't even, yeah, it doesn't even matter. The idea though is that you're looking at one person's wage. Now that one person's wage has now doubled because that one person is no longer 1 to 15, it's now going to be 1 to 7.5, which is better than 1 to 15 because that one person's job or
No,
salary has
no, no,
doubled.
no, no,
It has doubled.
no,
The
no.
wife, the
Hang
woman in
on,
the house is not paying anything. His wage
no, no.
doubled.
Hang on, hang
Mm,
on. Let me explain. Let me explain. I think it won't make much of a difference, and the reason is what I was trying to explain was that we've moved from a situation where one person's wage was sufficient to cater for most of these things, right?
mhm.
Slowly over time, what's now happened is that the pressure is that bad that men and women in a household now has to work. But it doesn't stop there because then the kids, when they are like, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, maybe, they end up taking jobs one day. They end up working like in cafes and all of those things. All of it is to supplement the income of the
Okay.
family. So, yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm meaning by the that capitalism has co-opted feminism because it started out well, but this is also part of the problem. This is part of the criticism that I'm talking about here of
Mm.
feminism, which is now you don't even have a choice anymore. Previously, 60, 70, 80 years ago, you had a choice. The woman can stay at home and look after the kids. But
Yep.
now, the economic imperative is such that the man and the woman have to go out and
Because of
work.
feminism, which is caused by feminism. But anyway, I mean, we can. Because I'm just really conscious of time as well. I'll just run through this comment and then I'll just rapid fire my points, and then you can do a bit of a rebuttal, and then we'll do closing remarks. QB
Sure,
Finest,
sure.
comment from QB Finest. I think whilst the man may be the face of the family and society, women from the background have a lot of control and influence over the powerful man. I agree, and I think that that's what it's
Yeah.
always been and what it should always be. That ties in with the traditional views, in my view, the traditional way of doing things, where the man goes out there, the powerful man goes out there, gets gets the bacon, brings it home, the woman cooks it up, and then you have that situation where the woman is determining what's even being fed to that man. I think that's what it should be, and I think most people are satisfied in that dynamic. Do you have any thoughts on this comment, Jab?
Yeah, no, I agree with him. I agree
Mm,
with that. Well,
mhm.
I think that's how it should be. Yeah, I think it's a unit. So I think men and women can work together, feminism or no feminism,
Yep.
and you're there to support each other. And if we all adopt that mindset, I think that we would have um, better families and everybody will be happier.
Yep. Let me just rapid fire through the rest of my points. I had five of them. So the first point I was talking about was that redefinition of gender roles. The other points are around the rise of transactional dynamics between men and women. I think currently now what's happened is that we're now looking at relationships, or women fundamentally look at relationships from a transactional perspective, rather than looking at it from what it used to be, which is more about the roles and the duties of a man and woman in a relationship. It's now turning into this transactional thing, things, traditional values, service of the man, a man making sure that he's always standing by his woman's side is not questionable. The men question themselves. Women submission is not seen as something that should be done. Provision, a man providing, which I think is fundamental to a relationship, is now seen as obsolete. It's a problem. We're having issues with marital rates declining. Cohabitation is now becoming a normal thing where people just kind of float around and stay together, which leads to higher instability of the relationships and impacts of the children and lower satisfaction. I think the third point here for me is the breakdown. Sorry, I'm just going to really rapid fire them. And if you want to take notes, feel free to take notes so you can give me a rebuttal on them. But it's just easier if I fire them through. And there's been breakdown in masculine leadership, which is again problematic because every kind of male authority these days is now being seen as patriarchy, toxic masculinity, misogyny is what it is now. If any man behaves in any way that's like a man, it's now seen as just being oppressive, which is now resulting in men feeling like they have to take a back seat. We've got men who think that they need to sit back and behave more passive. They go for dates and they're asking to split the bill 50-50. They're sitting at home and making sure that things are going to be balanced and all this. It's just becoming nonsensical. There's not respect anymore for men as a result of these things. The fourth thing is sexual liberation, which I think is against emotional fulfillment. Feminism has pushed for sexual liberation as if men and women are the same when we think about sex. In my view, and we can have a whole topic on this one if we like, but in my view, I think men and women are completely polarized when it comes to sex. Men look at sex as a transactional activity. Women look at sex as an emotional one. Fundamentally, this does not apply to every single person. This is my view on this one. And I think what's happening now is that we're now focusing on the current modern day dating with the is it Tinder, the Tinders, and the rest of all these apps, Bumbles, and all these things, where they're now focusing on transactional bits and pieces or transactional relationships, which leads to dissatisfaction more often than not in the women, not the men. The men who are getting picked on Tinders and Bumbles and whatever the other things are called are happy. They're getting loads of sex from different women. The women aren't, because they're not going in there for sex. They're looking for emotional connection, etc. And the final point is that it undermines, going to the points that we've had in a few earlier sections, is that it undermines our religious and cultural frameworks and the underpinnings, which I consider to be the underpinnings of society. Things like modesty, family roles, things like submission, things like provision, which I've talked about again already, are now seen as repressive, and they're now being pushed back and saying, no, don't do that. A man, to your points that you were raising earlier, a man should come back home after work, even though he's providing the vast majority of things at home. He should come back home and wash the dishes. Why does he come back to wash the dishes? It's not, that's not, he should not be washing the dishes. I think if a man's come back home to wash the dishes, not out of, oh, let me just support her because she's doing 2,000 different things, let me do it. But it's like, oh no, it's back home now, I need to go wash the dishes. He's already failed. That's my view. That's my perspective on that. He should have empowered her to the position where she doesn't need him to come back home to wash the dishes. And if that's not the case, there's a problem. And I think these are the 5 key points, I think, in my view. I think feminism. Well, yeah. And did you have any rebuttals to any of those things?
I do, but I don't think we've got the time for it. I think the thing I'm going to say is that, the thing that is constant in life is change.
Mm.
And society has changed a lot, and we are reacting to it. And I gave an example with economics. So another way that things have changed, dating, for instance, has moved. Well, it hasn't moved, but as you know, people are meeting online, for instance, right? And that's because we now have a new technology which allows people to meet offline, like you and I. That's how we first met, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in fact, same actually with Farouk and and Yemi. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think to have a good relationship, marriage or any relationship, I think the two people have to be, open and frank with each other, and just be open and frank. Communicate well. Treat each other as you like to be. Treat other people as you like to be treated. I think that's how I would probably maybe frame that. I think, in my view, I think that feminism has done a lot of good. Yes, there are areas that are problematic, but that's true for whatever whatever subject you look at or discuss.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think you've already crossed over into this. I'll just throw my own final rejoinder, and then if you have any final last thoughts, last thoughts, then we can throw them in. But I think, in my view, I don't think feminism has provided any real value to anyone or to anything. I think it's caused quite a few problematic situations in the modern day. It's caused confusion between what men and women should want. It's led to issues to deep dissatisfaction with women in their relationships, in the cultural heritage that they've had, and it's not empowered them in any meaningful way. Rather, it's halved the financial value of labor in the current market. I think it's just also erased the old certainties around how men and women should be, what women should expect from life, and removed the general overall happiness and satisfaction. You can see this, and this is well researched and looked into around the surveys. If you look into that, you see quite a few surveys that point out that some of the most unhappy demographics of humans, period, are a very specific subset of women at a very specific age, who have a very specific status, who have been living a very specific life. I'll leave that open to whoever wants to look into it to figure out those boxes and what they fill into. But what you're going to see there is feminism. The worst thing about feminism as well is that it's also affecting men. It tells men to step back, and a woman should take on more, without showing either gender or sex how to love, lead, or serve, which is problematic. I think traditional relationships worked not because they were perfect, but because they're rooted in key fundamental things. There was duty, clarity on roles and expectations, and faith, the fundamental values, that the bedrocks behind society. Even though I'm irreligious, I believe that these things are still fundamental tenets behind society. And the final closing sentence or that I'll put in there is that in chasing freedom, we've lost each other. Is what's happened. Feminism has chased freedom and it's lost it. It's lost everything. Any final thoughts from you? Go close up shop.
Yeah. So yeah. So I think that I get a lot of what you're saying, but again, I'm going to go back to that point, that example that I gave with judging Christianity based on the behavior of its adherents. I don't think that feminism is incompatible with some of the values that you mentioned. I think you're focusing on the abuse of feminism to describe it. I think that it's a good thing that feminism fought for the right to vote, for girls to be educated. I know some of my teachers were, brilliant professors and teachers in medical school, and colleagues that I work with. And, we've got doctors, everywhere you go, you find women who can look after them. They are our mothers, they are our sisters. And I don't think that there's anything wrong in them flourishing in those roles. So I think we have to be mindful about defining feminism based on its abuse. That's how I see it. And maybe I can now use this opportunity to thank everybody who has logged on today and joined us today. And sorry we started off a bit late. I think we had some confusion with the change in the clocks. And
Fantastic.
we hope to see you next.
Yep. Jab, as always, it's been a pleasure. It's been good. Everyone has watched. Thank you for joining. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the engagement.
Thank you.
It's always good to be misaligned. Have a good evening. Signing out.
And you. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.